Some Husker fans are saying this is the biggest recruiting weekend in Nebraska football history.
You are Locked On Huskers, your daily podcast on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey gang, DP here, Locked On Huskers. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers the first watch listen each and every single day. Greatly appreciate it. I want to thank the folks from FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America, America's number one sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the National Basketball Association. And here's what FanDuel has done for you. No sweat first bet, up to $1,000 in bonus bets for new customers. New customers only. That's the caveat. But no sweat first bets. Miss on the first bet? No problem. But that's if you're a new customer. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That information is right there on the strip for you. It's a big weekend. And so a couple of things that we'll focus on today. One, the weekend that was, and having all of these recruits in town. We'll talk about a couple of them. And then over the course of that, some of what is happening within the program. The key words, the words that are spoken the most over the course of the weekend. So there's lots to talk about. If you're going to talk recruiting and you're going to talk Nebraska football, currently there's one name that rises above all the rest. And it's important. And here's the thing that strikes me about the weekend and the energy surrounding recruiting weekend. Matt Rhule and his coaching staff did an exceptional job of putting on display the brand that they want Nebraska football to be. What they talk about is important. The things that you talk about most are on purpose. Now, I'll say that again. The things that are talked about the most are on purpose. So when you start breaking down Nebraska recruiting and their approach as it currently stands is this. They should be priority and focused one with legacies. The family members, the families of Nebraska football. They need to become possessive, territorial and possessive about Nebraska football, about future Huskers through former Huskers. That's going to be the identity of this program. That Matt Rhule has said, okay, listen. Yes, we believe that our connections in Texas have value and should help us. But we have to be dominant. We have to be purposeful. And we have to be forceful within the state of Nebraska and within a Husker family that has talent in this next generation. And Dylan Raiola is example one. When you have somebody connected to the Husker football family who has elevated himself through the work to being the number one recruit, at a position of need for the University of Nebraska with a name that Nebraska is familiar with. And it's been co-signed by every major program in America. That every major program in the country wants this young man to be their guy for the next 4 years. Now, there's something complimentary about wanting a former Huskers son to be the focus and purpose and direction and North Star for the Nebraska football program. Because Dad already knows what Nebraska is. He knows Lincoln. Mom knows Lincoln. They're familiar with Coach Osborne and the legacy and the blood, the sweat, the tears, the broken bones, the sacrifices, all the things that happened right down at Memorial Stadium. It doesn't have to be explained to them from point zero. They already have an understanding because it's in their house. They grew up with it. They got used to seeing dad on videotape. They've heard the conversations that are held and what high regard that these families are being held in because of and within Nebraska football. But Dylan Raiola provides a different opportunity because with a new regime and a new commitment to recruiting, a new way of recruiting, and there are a couple of things that we keep that I'll say over the course of this episode. New, different, better. New way of doing it, a different way of doing it, and then hopefully a better way of doing it. New, better, different. The original commitment to Ohio State landed like a gut punch to Nebraska football fans. I mean, this is like, oh my goodness, we're in this thing. We have a shot. There's somebody that actually knows us, that could love us and could validate us to the rest of the country. And most importantly, to themselves. Dylan Raiola could give verification and validation to every Husker fan in the country. Granted, he could do that for everybody else in the country as well, but everybody else doesn't need it, and everybody else is not already emotionally invested, and not everybody else needs Dylan Raiola as their quarterback. They all want him. Alabama's going to be Alabama whether Dylan Raiola goes there or not. USC is going to be USC whether Dylan Raiola goes there or not. Nebraska needs Dylan Raiola. They want him, but they need him. And Nebraska fans need the win. They need the validation. They need, look, there's a lot of PTSD with Husker fans about getting your hopes up and then having those hopes crashed and just blown up in your faces. And look, this is a fan base that is still in full support, in full voice, loud and proud about being, about Husker Nation. But this is important for Husker fans. And there is a lot of energy, resources, affection, time, energy being put into the Dylan Raiola pool. And rightfully so. He can change the program. He can make the program better. And then the big part, the unspoken part, is that he also gives validation to a lot of other 4- and 5-star recruits that if it's good enough for Dylan Raiola, that it may in fact be good enough for them. We'll throw it a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about Dylan Raiola and kind of the energy and the space around the program this weekend, because he met and re-met, visited and revisited with Husker Nation in full display. We'll talk about that and the weekend when we come back. Hey, gang, welcome back to Locked On Huskers. I'm DP. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. Your second watch and listen should be Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown, informed decisions about your picks going into both the men's and women's Final Four. Prepare yourself. It's just been chaos. This has been the most ridiculous of tournaments, and rightfully so. Fans are engaged, and now you get to the big ball games. Less margin of error. Get your focus, get your information from Locked On College Basketball Breakdown, Bracket Breakdown. You can do that on YouTube or however else you consume your podcast. We're talking Nebraska football and the recruiting of Dylan Raiola, and on a busy weekend. There are a ton of young people here and a lot of families that were here. It was interesting to watch the reaction, because people's first time into Lincoln and into this space, they're thrown off a little bit by what their perceptions are and what their preconceived ideas of what Lincoln, Nebraska would be like. And then they get here, and then all of that shaken and stirred. But then for Dylan Raiola, he's familiar. He's been here. He knows where everything is. He knows who the people are. But he got to to visit and revisit with a lot of Husker fans. Made appearances around town. Actually went through and met a ton of folks at the practice Saturday, and then went down to baseball and softball and was seen down at Haymarket Park. Took a ton of pictures with former Husker players, with Husker fans, baseball fans, football fans, softball fans, basketball fans. And an interesting thing happened is that word started to travel that he was engaging and social, that he was actually mingling. He was actually putting himself out into the crowd. And as more people began to be around him or found their way around him, an interesting thing happened, I'm told, that Dylan Raiola began to recruit other players to be a part of what was going on. He was including people, and he was sharing knowledge of to other recruits, actually informing them. And I don't want it to be missed that familiarity brings consideration. If you're familiar with a thing, you become more comfortable in it. You allow yourself to be more comfortable in it. And what happened was Dylan Raiola was inviting people into his space, and then he was actually explaining why they should stay there. He was explaining to other recruits about the values and virtues of Nebraska football. And it can't be missed as well that if Dylan Raiola signs he commits to the University of Nebraska, that immediately changes the location and elevation of Nebraska football program simply by his addition. Because then, if you get the number one quarterback, then it becomes way more interesting and absolutely more capable for you to get a commitment from the number one receiver in the country, or maybe the number 5, or maybe number 20. It becomes way more interesting and appealing. It becomes more attractive to the number one offensive tackle in the country and the number one offensive guard. Because once again, we all want to be places where the best want to be. That's recruiting. And yes, the big dog and pony show that is college recruiting and spring games, we understand that. Nobody's naive to that now. You can't be. You can't be a fan and be naive to the fact that the videos that are shared, the practice sessions themselves, they're dog and pony shows. They're not really set to get you prepared for September. It is to get people excited about the program as it stands so that it gets better between now and September. More sponsors, more boosters, more fans, more energy, more focus, more attention, more narrative. It's important for this stretch of Nebraska football to go as planned. And there's been, I have to be honest, there's been a ton of work. This looks prepared and polished. And not that hasn't been done before, but the work being shown should put fans in a better mood, in a better focus, being more aware of who these young people are and what's going on in the program. And if you're getting the top recruit in the country to once again consider you, once again being considered by the top recruit in the country, name or not name, familiar or not familiar, Husker or not Husker, removing all the modifiers, he's simply the most coveted player in the country. And if he's considering that Nebraska is good enough to be trusted with his future, to be trusted with his health, to be trusted with his nourishment, to be trusted as a community, to be trusted by the execs and by the coaching staff and by the developers and by the educators, that's a big statement for the University of Nebraska. And then what happens from that is the inclusion of others who can help this program, more top level, elite level high school players to consider the University of Nebraska because the best in the country stared them all in the eye, looked them all in the face, and then considered that of all things, Nebraska would actually be the best choice. Now, I don't know what the priority and what the chain of thought would be for Dylan Raiola and how he's choosing whether it's, Nebraska, Georgia, USC, Ohio State, whoever. And the same goes for all the other recruits that were there this weekend who got to see the coaches work. They got to hear the verbiage. They got to feel the energy. They got to be able to assess the attitudes and the approach schemes. They got to see whether they understood this. Does the system work for me? Is there a place for me in this system? Does this make sense? Parents got to see, okay, are these people that I can trust? I need to pay attention to the way they talk to their players because that's how they're going to be talking to my son. And I have to tell you that a lot of recruiting decisions are made and not made because of the way coaches talk to players on the recruiting trips and at these practices. Some parents want the dog bark. They want it loud and they want it definitive and they want that. There are others that want loving, caring. Hey, talk to my young man as a young man. And then there are those that get out of the way and simply watch and respond to how their young person is reacting to the coach's voice, their verbiage, and their energy. Nebraska's in play for Dylan Raiola. They're in play. Everybody will have their opinion on whether you think he comes or not. And you can feel free. You can put in the comments whether you think Dylan Raiola comes to Nebraska. Now, you can put in, you know what? I feel like it's 50-50 at this point because that may actually be true. It may actually be 33%. It may actually be 75%. I don't know. You feel free. Put yours in the comments and let me know what you think. Does Dylan Raiola become a Husker? Does he become a Husker? I don't know. I'm not sure. I wish I was. I'd feel better if I felt, like I could just say, yeah, this is going to happen. But it's not there. Not yet. Not until he decides. We'll throw the break. When we come back, we'll close out. We'll mention some of the other folks who were here in camp because there's a couple of players of note to mention. Run to builtmarchmadness.com. Builtmarchmadness.com and vote for your favorite bar, puff, or pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March. So hop in and support your pick. Now, if you're not familiar with it, go in and get the samples, get familiar with the product. But builtmarchmadness.com. Builtmarchmadness.com. And you can see what's going on. We'll close out this episode of Locked On Huskers. Hey, gang, welcome back to Locked On Huskers. And again, thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. I hope that you have gone down and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, that you're following the content you're getting. We're going to take you all the way through. Like the rest of the month of March, we'll take you through all the way up to April 22nd, spring game, and then we'll give you the recap. So we will help you prepare for it. We will give you a preview for it, and then we'll give you a review of all things Huskers and Huskers football as we go through. I want to close with this because Dylan Raiola was the centerpiece. He was the shining gem centerpiece that set the standard for how all business was being done last week. But there were some other players, and there's a player that came in and did things a little differently than some of the others. Often players come in and they bring parents or they bring, siblings or whatever. But Samisi Tonga from West Jordan, Utah, shout out. Shout out to the Trojans of West High School in Salt Lake City. David Woodard and that staff does a fine job. But Samisi Tonga is a 310-pound offensive lineman. To say that he is a unique talent is understating it. An elite athlete, violent hands, great core, exceptional footwork for a big man, great lower body. But what he did when he came to town was that he invited some teammates. And if you're not familiar with Utah football, high school football, Polynesian lineman is a thing. It's a thing. It's a factory. And he brought some folks with him. And this is another of the Raiola situation that if Nebraska can figure out a way to out-recruit Tony Tuioti in Oregon and get Tonga here in Nebraska, that opens the gate, that opens the pathway to Nebraska to then recruit in a portal of offensive and defensive linemen that are NFL family legacy deep. It is a name, like you can roll through it. There's a ton of folks that are talented in Salt Lake City and Provo. And if Nebraska can find their way into that recruiting portal, my goodness gracious, it could change. It's another thing that can change how Nebraska is perceived and then how Nebraska develops, because you're going to get better talent, better clay to work with to begin with. That's a statement of truth. Well, again, thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen to each and every single day. Your second should be Locked On College Basketball. Isaac and Andy taking you through as we head to the Final Four. Andy and Isaac can break it down for you. They'll bring coaches on the programs, but go and find them on YouTube or however else you consume your podcast daily. Thank you once again for making Locked On Huskers a part of your day. We'll close with the three words that we love so much. Go Big Red.